people who've been in a coma. What did it feel like? I was 15 when I got sick. Started with what I thought was just a really bad cold. But by day 3, my fever was so high, I was basically talking nonsense. My mom freaked out and rushed me to the hospital. Turns out what I thought was the flu was actually pneumonia that had gotten so bad it turned into sepsis. The infection was literally poisoning my blood. The doctor said my body was shutting down to protect itself. I remember being wheeled into the ICU and hearing my mom crying in the hallway. That's the last thing I remember for 3 months. But here's the weird part. I wasn't just lying there in darkness like people think. In my mind, I was back in our old house from when I was little, the one we moved out of when I was 8 after my brother Amir died in that car crash. Everything looked exactly the same. Same ugly green carpet in the living room. Same creaky stairs, even the same smell of my mom's cooking. But I couldn't leave. Every door was locked. Every window wouldn't budge. I could see people outside, though. Neighbors walking their dogs. My parents driving by. Even some of my friends from school. I'd bang on the windows, scream at them, but they never looked up. It was like I was invisible. The only person who could see me was a mirror. He looked exactly like he did before the accident, wearing that stupid Lakers jersey he practically lived in. He'd show up every day and just hang out with me. We'd sit on the couch playing video games that weren't even plugged in, or he'd tell me dumb jokes like we used to. But Amir kept saying weird stuff, too. He'd be like, "You gotta stay awake in here, Ravi. Don't let yourself drift too deep or you might not find your way back." I didn't really get what he meant at first. Sometimes these really loud rumbling sounds would shake the whole house like thunder, but way more intense. When that happened, Amir would get all serious and urgent. He'd grab my shoulders and be like, "They're calling you. Listen hard. That's your way out." It took me forever to realize those rumbles weren't thunder at all. They were voices from the real world. My mom singing to me by my hospital bed. The doctors talking about my treatment. Even my friends who came to visit, though. I found that out later. The strangest part was how time worked. Sometimes it felt like air and I hung out for days. But other times he'd disappear for what seemed like weeks. The house would get really quiet and cold and I'd start panicking that I was stuck there forever. Near the end, Amir started acting different. He seemed kind of sad, but also excited, if that makes sense. He kept walking to the front door and just staring at it. One day he finally opened it and there was this bright light pouring in. Not harsh light, but warm and welcoming. He turned to me and said, "Time to go now, little brother. I'll see you later, but not too soon, okay?" Then he stepped aside and motioned for me to walk through the door. I was scared at first, but then I heard my mom's voice super clearly through that light. She was crying and saying, "Please come back to me, baby, please." So I stepped forward into the light. Next thing I knew, I was opening my eyes in a hospital room. My mom was slumped over in a chair next to my bed, holding my hand. When she saw me looking at her, she started crying so hard the nurses came running. I was in the hospital for another month after that doing physical therapy because my muscles had basically forgotten how to work. The doctor said it was a miracle I didn't have brain damage. They kept asking me if I remembered anything from the coma, but I was too embarrassed to tell them about the house and air. It wasn't until like 6 months later that I finally told my mom about it, about how Amir had been with me the whole time, keeping me company and making sure I didn't give up. She went completely white when I said his name. Then she started crying again, but differently this time. She told me that every single night I was in the coma, she would sit by my bed and whisper, "Amir, please watch over him. Please don't let him go." Turns out my mom had been asking my dead brother to protect me, and somehow I was 15 when I got sick, thinking it was just a bad cold. By day 3, my fever was so high I was speaking nonsense. My mom rushed me to the hospital where they diagnosed pneumonia turning into sepsis. My blood was literally poisoning my body. The doc said my body was shutting down to protect itself. I was wheeled into ICU, mom crying nearby. That was the last thing I remembered for 3 months. But it wasn't the darkness people expect. In my mind, I was back in our old house from childhood, the one we left when my brother Amir died in a car crash. Everything was exactly the same. The green carpet, creaky stairs, even mom's cooking smells. But I was trapped. Every door locked, every window wouldn't open. I could see neighbors outside, parents driving by, friends walking, yet they never saw me. I was invisible. The only person who could see me was a mirror reflection of Amir, wearing his Lakers jersey, hanging out with me. We'd play unplugged video games and joke like old times. But Amir warned me, "Stay awake here, Ravi. Don't drift too deep or you might never come back. Sometimes loud rumbles shook the house. Amir said those were voices from the real world calling me back. Mom singing by my bedside, doctors talking about treatment, friends visiting. Time was strange. Sometimes I lingered for days, sometimes weeks passed. Near the end, Amir seemed sad but also excited. One day he opened the front door, light flooding in, telling me, "Time to go now. I'll see you later, but not too soon." I heard Mom's voice through the light, begging, "Please come back to me." "Baby!" I stepped through. Then I woke up in the hospital, Mom holding my hand, crying hard. Nurses rushed in. I spent a month in rehab. My muscles had forgotten how to work. The doctor said it was a miracle I had no brain damage. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone about my house in the coma until 6 months later. When I finally shared it with Mom, saying Amir had been with me, she turned white and cried again, this time relief, telling me she had prayed every night for Amir to watch over me. My mom's prayers were answered in ways I couldn't have imagined. Story. I returned from lunch to find compliance officers searching my workspace. Routine inspection, they claimed, but I knew my jealous ex-wife and her new husband reported me. "Find anything interesting?" I asked calmly. Their faces went pale when they discovered. Chapter 1: The Inspection. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly as I stepped back into the office, a coffee still warm in my hand. I froze. 3 compliance officers in dark suits were combing through my workspace. Drawers pulled open, files spread across the desk. Even my computer already powered on. "Routine inspection?" One of them muttered without looking at me, as if I were just another nuisance in their day. Routine? Not a chance. My gut twisted. I already knew who was behind this. My ex-wife Jessica and her smug new husband Daniel. Ever since the divorce, they had been circling like vultures, trying to ruin me at every possible turn. And now this. They thought they'd finally cornered me. I set my coffee down slowly, keeping my voice calm. "Find anything interesting?" I asked, tilting my head. One officer glanced at me nervously, then at the folder in his hands. His face drained of color. The other 2 froze, eyes wide. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then, almost in unison, they shut the folder and exchanged panicked looks. "Sir," one finally said, his voice clipped. "We need to verify something." Immediately, I leaned against the desk, my calm expression hiding the fire raging inside me. They hadn't found what Jessica and Daniel wanted them to find. They'd found something else, something even they weren't prepared for. And at that moment, I realized this wasn't just their game anymore. It was mine. Chapter 2: The Pale Faces. The silence stretched. Papers that were supposed to bury me had instead turned the officers into statues. One of them swallowed hard, his knuckles white around the folder. What is this?" he muttered almost to himself. I tilted my head. "You tell me. You're the experts." The officer closest to the computer spun the monitor toward me. My stomach tightened, but I didn't let it show. On the screen was a folder labeled in bold caps. Daniel Private inside, dozens of PDFs, receipts, and scanned documents. Payments routed through shell accounts. Wire transfers overseas. Names of officials with suspiciously neat numbers scribbled beside them. It wasn't my mess. It was Daniel's. The jealous fool had been using his influence to try and frame me, planting files on the company server under my access profile. But instead of the fake evidence, the officers had stumbled into something much bigger. His real, very illegal empire. One of the men closed the laptop quickly and hissed, "This goes beyond you. We'll need to take this upstairs immediately." I almost smiled. Almost? Because now I knew something Jessica and Daniel didn't. They thought today was the day I'd be ruined. But really, today was the day I learned exactly how to ruin them. Chapter 3: The Whispered Offer. The compliance officers didn't leave right away. Instead, 2 of them motioned me into a side office. The blinds rattled as the door shut behind us. One leaned in. "Listen carefully. What we found, it's not just grounds for dismissal. It's criminal. Offshore accounts, shell companies, kickbacks, and your ex-wife's new husband is right in the middle of it." I crossed my arms, my face unreadable. "And you're telling me this because—" The older officer sighed, lowering his voice. "Because someone tried to make it look like you were the one running this. But the trail's sloppy. Whoever did it underestimated us. Your name shows up on the surface, but every file links back to Daniel." For a moment, I let the silence hang. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. So you're saying I'm clear? Clear? The officer gave a bitter laugh. You're not just clear. You may be the only witness we can use to nail him. That was the moment the chessboard shifted. Jessica and Daniel wanted to ruin me. Instead, they'd handed me the perfect weapon, their own dirty secrets, gift wrapped by their arrogance. I nodded slowly. If you want him, I'll help you. But on one condition, I stay out of the headlines. I've been through enough. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, then gave a single nod. Agreed. But if I were you, I'd keep your head down. When men like Daniel feel cornered, they get dangerous. I didn't reply because what he didn't know was I wasn't just going to help them catch Daniel. I was going to make sure Jessica and Daniel watched their empire burn from the inside out. Chapter 4. The cracks appear. 3 days passed. I went about my life as though nothing had happened. Work, gym, dinner with my son on my custody nights. But beneath the calm surface, the storm was gathering. Jessica was the first to break the silence. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, dressed in designer heels and sunglasses too large for her face. Her knock was sharp, insistent. When I opened the door, she pushed her way in. "What the hell did you do?" she hissed. I raised an eyebrow. "Good morning to you, too." "Don't play stupid with me," she snapped. Daniel's company accounts are frozen. The SEC is sniffing around. Do you have any idea what that means for us, US? The word was almost laughable. I leaned against the counter. Jessica, maybe the better question is, why would federal investigators be interested in Daniel's accounts in the first place? Her face flickered, a fraction of a second of panic she couldn't hide. Then she forced a bitter smile. "You think you're clever, don't you? But you're nothing without us, nothing." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because later that night, Daniel himself proved how badly they were unraveling. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Meet me midnight. Pier 17, don't bring anyone. We need to talk. Daniel." I stared at the screen for a long time before finally smiling. He thought he was the hunter, luring me into some midnight intimidation scene. But what he didn't know was the compliance officers had already bugged his phones. By the time I showed up at Pier 17, they'd be listening to every word. Chapter 5. Pier 17. The fog rolled in thick over the water, swallowing the city lights until only faint glimmers danced on the waves. Pier 17 was almost deserted, save for the sound of gulls and the faint creak of ropes against weathered wood. Daniel stood at the far end of the pier, trench coat collar up, pacing like a man who couldn't sit still. When he saw me, he smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're a real pain in the ass, you know that?" he muttered as I walked closer. "You think you can just walk away from Jessica and me without consequences?" I kept my voice even. Pretty ironic hearing that from the man who tried to ruin me with false reports. He laughed, sharp, forced. "Reports? No, my friend. This is bigger than reports. You've stumbled into a world you don't understand. You've got no idea who you're messing with." I tilted my head. "Then enlighten me." Daniel leaned in, voice low. "The offshore accounts, the compliance flags, they're just scratching the surface. There's money moving you couldn't dream of. Favors traded at levels you'll never reach. And if you don't back off, I'll make sure you vanish permanently." I let his words hang in the air. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, because what Daniel didn't know. Every word he'd just spoken was being recorded. The tiny wire in my jacket fed his confession directly to the investigators who were probably listening in real time. I stepped back, giving him the faintest smile. "Funny thing about the truth, Daniel. It has a way of surfacing no matter how deep you try to bury it." For the first time, his smirk faltered. What the hell does that mean? Behind him, 2 figures emerged from the fog. Plainclothes agents flashing badges so quickly only I could see. Daniel hadn't noticed them yet, and that was the moment I knew his world was about to implode. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. Daniel finally noticed the faint shuffle of feet behind him. He spun, confusion flickering across his face as the 2 Plainlow agents stepped out of the fog, badges glinting. "Daniel Briggs," one said firmly. "You're under investigation for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to obstruct federal compliance. You need to come with us." His jaw dropped. "What?" "No, this is a mistake." He set me up. He jabbed a finger at me, but I just crossed my arms. Calm, almost bored. "Funny. You've been trying to set me up for weeks." "Looks like you got sloppy." The agents moved in, cuffing him before he could bolt. He thrashed, yelling curses, his voice carrying over the water. Jessica, Jessica, help me! And right on cue, headlights swept across the pier. A sleek black car screeched to a stop, and Jessica leapt out, her heels clacking against the boards. She looked furious until she saw Daniel in cuffs. What? What is this? She stammered. One agent turned toward her. Mrs. Briggs, we'll need to ask you some questions, too. Your name appears on several linked accounts, her face drained of color. No, I don't have anything to do with this. Daniel barked a bitter laugh. Don't play dumb, Jess. You told me to do it. You wanted him ruined. You said it was the only way we'd get free. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. The damning words were caught on the agent's recorders. I stepped forward, my voice low, but sharp enough to cut through the night. You wanted me out of the house, out of your life, penniless and broken. Instead, you've dragged yourself into the mud. You thought I'd beg. You thought I'd collapse. But here's the thing. I leaned in close enough for only Jessica to hear. You picked the wrong man to underestimate. Her eyes filled with tears as the agents led Daniel away. The car door slammed, and for the first time, Jessica stood completely alone, her empire of lies crumbling around her. I turned and walked back down the pier, the fog swallowing their voices behind me. Each step felt lighter than the last. Because revenge wasn't about rage, it was about patience, precision, and timing. And tonight, everything had landed exactly where it needed to. Chapter 7, The Aftermath. News of Daniel's arrest spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, his mug shot was splashed across local headlines. Financial advisor caught in federal fraud case. Reporters dug up every skeleton in his past, and with each article, Jessica's carefully constructed reputation cracked wider. Her family, once smug and superior, now found themselves fielding calls from angry investors, furious clients, and shocked neighbors. At the grocery store, whispers followed Jessica like a shadow. Parents pulled their children closer. Old friends crossed the street to avoid her. But the worst came at night because the recordings, the ones where Daniel and Jessica plotted to ruin me, were admissible in court. My lawyer had already filed for full custody, citing child endangerment and conspiracy. The judge barely needed convincing. Jessica was granted only supervised visitation. Her scream in the courtroom echoed long after the gavel struck. Meanwhile, I was quietly rebuilding. My company, nearly strangled by the false accusations Daniel had planted, saw a resurgence. Clients who had once hesitated now admired my resilience. Some even said, "If you can survive that storm, I trust you with mine." One evening, weeks later, I was walking home with my son when we passed Jessica outside a shuttered cafe. She looked like a ghost of herself, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled, eyes hollow. She tried to speak, but no words came. My son gripped my hand tighter and whispered, "She doesn't scare me anymore." I bent down, kissed his head, and smiled. Good, because she can't hurt us anymore. Jessica's tears slipped silently down her cheeks as we walked away. She had mocked me, underestimated me, and tried to erase me. But in the end, it wasn't my fists or my fury that destroyed her. It was her own arrogance. And I didn't just win back my life. I won it stronger, freer, and cleaner than ever before. Epilogue. The regret. They never escaped. Months later, I found myself back at the pier where it all began. The place Jessica and her brothers had dragged me out by my hair, laughing as if they'd won. I stood there at sunset, the ocean glowing gold. My son sat beside me, dangling his legs off the edge. He was smiling again, carefree in a way I hadn't seen in years. Behind us, laughter and music from families echoed faintly. Real families intact and strong. I thought about how Jessica had tried to strip that from me, how certain she was that money and arrogance would always shield her. But arrogance is a poor defense against truth. Somewhere in the city, she was alone, disgraced, her inheritance drained by lawsuits and debts. Daniel sat behind bars, his name forever tied to scandal. Her family no longer answered her calls. I closed my eyes and replayed the moment I warned them. You'll regret this. Back then, they had laughed. Now that warning was the only thing left echoing in their lives. A prophecy fulfilled with brutal precision. My son nudged me, holding up a seashell he'd found. Can we take this home, Dad? A memory of today. I smiled and took the shell, slipping it into my pocket. Of course, because today, son, we're building memories worth keeping. We stood and walked away together, leaving the pier behind, and with it, every shadow of betrayal. For them, regret would last forever. For us, only peace remained.